Hello, welcome to About Regional, part of the Region Media Group. Lunchtime on a Wednesday at the Bega River Reserve. Talking live to the member for Bega, Liberal Andrew Constance, ready to face the voters again this Saturday. Going for your fifth term, Andrew. How's this election campaign compared to the 3 or 4 you've done previously?
Well, we haven't been facing the voters just this Saturday. I mean, it's been going now since the week before last in terms of pre-poll voting. And what's extraordinary is that we're now seeing around 45% of people voting before election day. So it's almost changing the way in which people are campaigning. And that's what I think's occurred with this election. Generally, it's over to the people to have their say. And for me, I took a very deliberate decision to run again after 16 years. I guess for a number of reasons, but certainly as someone who's walked out of a very serious car accident, I do want to see the highway fixed. And very pleasingly, we've been able to announce that during the campaign.
A big announcement during the campaign. The Moruya bypass seemed to be central to that, but it will also seem to be a surprise to some people, this talk of a bypass for Moruya.
Well, I surprised people last time around with the announcement of the Batemans Bay Bridge, and everyone said, oh, you wouldn't build it. Well, and guess what? It's now being built. The main reason that we've opted for the $306 million being allocated to the Moruya bypass is that we also have to see a decision made in the next couple of months in relation to the location of the new regional hospital, which Gladys Berejiklian and I announced back in October. We want to be able to make sure that we don't have a choke point close to that regional facility, given that everyone in the Eurobodalla is going to have to, travel to the new regional facility. So regardless of where the hospital is, you do want to have a smooth pathway through that part of the highway. And very pleasingly, to be able to see the duplication south of the Jervis Bay turnoff. I mean, the government's invested hundreds of millions of dollars, well over $2 billion into the highway to get it duplicated to Jervis Bay. And we're now at that point where we obviously need to keep bringing it south and making sure that if we have parts of it duplicated further south, then hopefully another tier of government might come to the party and start to fill in the missing gap.
You took the words out of my mouth. You've been very strong in terms of pointing to the federal government and their need to be a part of this duplication process. Where are your colleagues in Canberra at?
Well, at the moment, I'm focused on Saturday and making sure people know our plan. And that's, that extra $1 billion, which has been costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office as part of our election costings, designed to actually start to duplicate it. Doesn't mean we don't walk away for necessary upgrades in the meantime. I mean, we're seeing Dedlingham's Creek obviously being completed at the moment. The bridge is open, but the section just north of there is still being worked on. We've got more upgrades that need to happen throughout, the length of the highway. But in the meantime, we're taking to the people this Saturday a plan, and it's an extensive plan, because you do need to, like we saw with the Pacific Highway, and the point that I'd make is you bundle up contracts and you get the contractors in and get the work happening. And this is going to require a lot of jobs in terms of road construction, and we give that pipeline of work to the sector. And if we can try and find better ways and quicker ways to build it, that's what we'll do. Canberra and our national government, to their credit, have gone and funded the Hume Highway and the Pacific Highway. Their funding obviously is allocated up until 2020 in terms of the PAC Highway, because it will be duplicated from Sydney to Brisbane. What we're now saying is, well, where do your dollars go in the 2020s through to 2030? And what better place to relocate those dollars other than the Princes Highway?
Let's come back to the new Eurobodalla Hospital for just a moment. It's some time off, a few years off at least. How do you manage that in between? There's a call from the community that the Batemans Bay and Moruya hospitals need work now. How do you manage that in between?
Well, you do it. I mean, one of the key learnings out of the South East Regional Hospital in Bega is you've got to build up capacity in your existing hospitals first before you transition to a new regional facility. So there's got to be an investment. I was very upset when I heard from my opponents that the government had cut services in the Eurobodalla. I mean, point to one service cut that's happened under our government. The last major service cut that happened was when Labor ripped the maternity out of Batemans Bay Hospital. And we've kept services growing with our community, but the point that I'd make into the future is we do need to build up services at Batemans Bay and Moruya hospitals as we transition to a new regional facility for the Eurobodalla. This is where the extensive clinical service planning is key to it, and that's been happening at the moment. I mean, everyone should remember that Gladys Berejiklian and I announced the new hospital back on October 31. I remember that date clearly because it's my birthday. But we've gone and announced that. It took the Labor Party 3 months to come into the Shire and say, well, we're going to build it too, but it's contingent upon Bill Shorten being elected. Well, no, let's get the facility built. The state can go it alone. We've got no debt. strong $4 billion surplus, an extensive program around capital works and hospitals. We've already delivered 100 new hospitals across the state, both redeveloped and new. And the Eurobodalla deserves its turn. So we will just get on with the expertise of health infrastructure guiding us. That's the agency responsible for building hospitals. They get involved in location. They get involved in the clinical service work. There's one thing I would insist on is we don't see a repeat of the past where Bateman's Bay and Maria hospitals are on a constrained site. So there's bad car parking.
Yep.
There's not the ability to expand. And we've got to go for a really good site that can expand into the future in 40, 50, 60 years' time so that the site grows with the community, and that's what hasn't happened in the past.
The About Regional community has submitted some questions for you this afternoon, and we'll get to those in a moment. But let's talk about the environment. We are standing in the middle of it, the beautiful Bega River environment. The environment, climate change, seems to be a theme this time round more so than in previous election campaigns. Are you feeling that as well, that the environment and climate change will determine some people's vote?
Yeah, I mean, invariably, as it should. I mean, every side of politics, I think, cares about the environment. My side gets a pretty rough deal, but I'll run through some of that for your viewers. I'm glad we're here at the Bega River because this is where we've invested tens of thousands of dollars into to help, organisations, be it, formerly catchment management authorities, ultimately working with local land services to be able to deliver great projects for our community. And there's a lot of people down here just experiencing this wonderful environment just, on the edge of Bega. There's a couple of things. First and foremost, as Transport Minister, and this is the great unknown, I'm responsible for building the biggest solar farm in the state's history at the moment, $150 million going into a solar farm. The reason that I'm doing that is to offset the emissions generated from the new metro train that I've got responsibility for building. So the government has said very clearly that we want by 2050 zero net emissions in New South Wales. We've already removed about 130 million tonnes of CO2 out of emissions in the last 10 years. We have a $1.4 billion climate change fund. One of the things that we're taking to the people of New South Wales on Saturday is a fantastic initiative where, unlike our predecessors who, when they had their solar bonus scheme last in government, and even their existing solar policy, it's wrong, it's geared wrongly. So what we're saying is we've got 350-odd thousand people who have solar on their homes in New South Wales. We in essence want to double that. The way to do it is actually offer people an upfront, no interest loan so that they can invest in the capital up to $15,000, put the solar on their roofs, and as their electricity bill is discounted, they pay back that capital. Once you do that, people get a $2,000 discount on their electricity bill. That's what they get back in their pocket by us putting that scheme in place. And that's what we're going to do to drive the numbers up. Unlike the last scheme, which Labor had, where you had the top 10% of people who could actually afford the capital up front being subsidised by the remaining 90%, particularly those who are from lower socioeconomic demographics, who are in essence subsidising that top 10%. That's the wrong way to go. That's why we've put in place this solar scheme. The other thing we need to be doing for the environment, let's have a very good look at pumped hydro. I mean, we've got a lot of opportunity around hydro to look at those opportunities. And I know the Energy Minister's been doing an audit in that regard. So, there is a lot of good policies there. I mean, as a government, we've introduced 12 new national parks and reserves, and at the same time, locally here, we've took a decision to protect the koala colony, which again is going to be subjected and supported through a plan of management of that reserve, which at this time has been finalised through OEH.
Let's stay with the environment. I guess some flack for you this week, a sticky situation at least when it comes to the Bateman's Marine Park Advisory Committee. Comments that you made to a meeting of wreck fishers in the Eurobodalla were leaked to the media. Some of those comments from you that you were making sure that people who are our friends are on that committee. Well,
so I'm no secret. I'm pro the recreational and commercial fishing sector. I mean, in terms of the marine environment and the broad-based marine biodiversity, we've got to do everything to protect that. You can't just put, a couple of marine parks in place and walk away from the rest of the marine environment. And what the government's done is more broadly look at the entire coast and put it under a body which looks at the entire coast. Now, the biggest threat to the marine environment is land-based activity. I mean, for goodness sake, we've got a sewage outfall pouring into one of our sanctuary zones. Now, I haven't heard too much angst out of the certain people in that regard. So, in terms of the advisory committee, which is the sticky point, I'm happy that Bill Barker from the Nature Coast Marine Group's on it. And, they're the types of people who are on it. I've never argued for dismantling the advisory committee on the basis of taking conservationists off or taking marine scientists off. The fishermen that are on there are people who've represented strongly and advocated strongly their interests as part of stakeholders. The fishing sector itself, if you look at the way the marine park was devised back in 2006, it was done the wrong way. And if everyone was being fair income, it wasn't based on marine scientists. It was based on, quite frankly, conservationists and fishermen sitting in rooms and just drawing lines on maps. Now, that's not good for the environment. We've got particular estuaries where there is a concentration of fishing effort. That's not good for the environment. And certainly in terms of the recreational fishing sector, they were fairly hard done by through that process. We ended up with 16,000 hectares in no-take zones, and in some cases for no reason. If you've got sandy bottoms and things like that, there's no harm in fishermen fishing off that. We've already actually changed 4 of the sanctuary zones in the marine park already, and we've indicated to them, as I said in that meeting, and I said publicly through my issued public statement, that we want to do some consultation. And this is the annoying part. Sections of the media didn't hear that. We actually announced just consultation, and that gives every opportunity for everyone of every viewpoint to participate in that into that consultation around those no-take zones. And at the same time, the government at least has been upfront and honest about our intent.
I guess the implication is, though, that consultation is perhaps not as genuine as it might be. The impression has been created that your mates are on this committee. Given the current political climate, do you regret that in a way, that
No.
impression is there?
No, because everybody knows that I support the recreational fishing sector in the same way I support the commercial sector. Yes, a loose term in that sense, but the reality is that we've got people who've headed up the Narooma Ports Committee in Philip Cray. We've got the former head of the Coastal Rights Association in Jack Tate. We've got the Recreational Fishing Alliance representative. This is not just some mate of mine in the pub that is representing, the interests of fishermen on the committee. I guess the challenge in this regard is we've said, well, let's go open to consultation, and not just to those who are on the advisory committee. Open it up for everybody in the community to have a say. Not necessarily those who've been selected on a government advisory committee, and it is an advisory committee. Let's look more broadly, and I've got to be honest, it concerns me when I'm hearing from members of the advisory committee that it hasn't had quorum in the last 12 months on a couple of occasions. This should be a fully functioning committee, and so we will go back and have a look at all of that. But that said and done, let's just be upfront and honest. At least people know where I stand. The Labor Party had a meeting at this Recreational Fishing Alliance 2 weeks before. No one knows what was said in that meeting, and I wonder why the ABC haven't reported on that.
One of the other comments that you made at that meeting, you described the bureaucracy as having green tentacles through it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there are people who are quite happy in bureaucracy to use their position and not really follow the direction of government. And I have been absolutely frustrated by some of the examples across our community where you can make a decision at a cabinet level, and then by the time it filters down into local community, you will find bureaucracy saying something completely and utterly different. And I've seen that on a number of occasions. We've got a classic example of that happening at the moment in the Eurobodalla. And I just think, to my point, I don't shy away from that. I think that, bureaucracy is there to administer the decisions of the democratically elected government of the day, and that's a very important step.
What role does science play in that equation?
Well, it's critical. And we have at least deployed some science into the Bateman's Marine Park. You can't tell me, and I'll give you a classic example of where we have deployed science. For many years, under the last Labor government, our horse riders were banned from riding bridle tracks through our wilderness areas. It wouldn't matter if it was the Shoebridge track, the Tarlington track, all through our national parks to our west are these incredible historic bridle tracks which led to the development of our region. Under the Labor, banned, not allowed to go in there. We worked through a period where we said, okay, we'll let the horse riders go back in on the basis of trial, on a trial basis, and we put some science behind whether they were actually doing environmental damage. And guess what? They got the green light. So, just recently, plans of management are now going to enable horse riders back into wilderness, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the environment. It's good that people are accessing the environment and protecting it, and the environment's got to be managed. I mean, I find in some ways a little bit sort of concerning that on one hand we have a conservation movement which says, well, lock areas up, and then, on the other hand say, well, no, we expect government intervention so everything gets managed. I mean, the whole debate around climate change is about management. We can't just lock up large tracklands of bushland and allow feral animals, noxious weeds, all sorts of things happen, wildfires, without appropriate management. And that's where, good conservation is about management. And I'd urge people to look strongly at what we are doing in terms of environmentalism, because it's not just a case of us being anti-environment at all. We've got good results. The best example I can point to is the Katona deposit scheme, where we've now seen quite literally a reduction in containers being littered across our community by 44%. And our community is seeing a much better result as a result of that practice.
Let's move on to arts and cultural funding. Again, another sticky news story for the government. Not sticky for you. So the implication, the perception is out there that Arts Minister Don Harwin and the Deputy Premier John Barilaro have handpicked the arts and cultural projects around the state, and that preference has been given to projects in coalition seats. The ABC reporting that 13 projects rejected by the review panel were then approved by the ministers.
Well, ABC can report like they want, but I'd say to the community, the ABC probably on that basis should stand against Twyford Hall, getting $7 million. The Bateman's Bay Performing Arts getting $8 million. The monies that we're putting into Murrah Hall and the Spiral Gallery, this is the fund where we're getting the benefit of this. And I'm very proud of the fact that the South East is getting one of the highest amounts of funding in terms of the arts out of all electorates in the state, because we deserve it, and our community deserves it, and our culture and our arts community deserve it. And, you look at the monies we've put into Fling, the monies that we've put into Four Winds. I'm very proud of this record. It's off the charts. And I don't think locals are complaining. So good on the old ABC. They've got it wrong, because our community is very happy to see the government investing in this way, and I'm proud of it.
The idea, though, of ministers overriding a review panel, an independent review panel that's been set up by the government, creates an impression, though.
Well, of what? I mean, ultimately, ministers are charged, democratically elected, to make decisions. And sometimes you do need to override your processes to make sure you get the right outcomes for community. We take advice from bureaucracy. We don't follow the advice. We have to take advice from bureaucracy. And, we've set the direction for this state. And what's ironic about this, and what really sort of upsets me a little, is I was the state treasurer who took to an election one of the largest transactions around the leasing of public assets in the state's history. As a result of that, we've now got a world-class regional infrastructure program, investing in culture and the arts, investing in sports. People can't spend the money quick enough, and it's come about because Mike Baird and I took that decision. And it was the right decision, because the state's now got no debt. It's grown its asset base by $70 billion. We haven't sold off the family farm. We've actually grown the state's asset base. We've got money going into regional communities in ways that we've never seen before. I mean, the Bega elections never had hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars spent on it, because state governments never had the capacity to do it. We've got unemployment at 3.9%. We've got a government with no debt. We've got $4 billion worth of surplus. And we've got good management of our assets. And this is why we're saying to the community come Saturday, don't change course right now. We've got a lot of building that we're still doing. If you look at us locally here, the Labor Party have not matched any of my commitments. My commitments have been fully costed through budget, through parliamentary budget offices and the like. And from what I can see, Labor have announced $1.5 million for the Australasian in Eden, but it's a tied requirement to council putting in the dollar for dollar. The Eurobodalla Hospital announcement doesn't happen unless Bill Shorten's elected. So what is Labor really offering in terms of commitment? And at no point have they matched anything. It wouldn't matter if it's a Bega sports ground, Campbell sports ground. There's been no matching of the announcements that we've made. Bega Police Station, the TAFEs, no matching there, and that is really concerning.
Just finally and quickly on arts and culture, the About Regional community has a shopping list of questions for you this afternoon. The Bega Valley Regional Gallery, no money for that yet?
No, but again, keep applying, council, and we'll consider it. I mean, one of the proud things that I have done is obviously put the $3 million into the old hospital, and I couldn't tell you how happy the trust is and the friends of the old hospital. I mean, we need to develop that as an arts and cultural precinct, and that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. My strong sense is that needs to be done in partnership with anything that the council does in terms of its regional gallery. I mean, the whole concept of a regional gallery only came about because the government had money and it started a very clear program of wanting to invest in regional arts and culture. So I'm sure, some of the critics won't complain if we see, Bega get its new regional art gallery at some point. The council want it. But, I'd say first round of funding, Twyford Hall, obviously the funds came from that. What we're seeing in terms of the second round of funding, it wasn't successful in that second round, and it did go in as an application in that second round from the council because we moved on Murrah and we moved on Spiral Gallery, and there will be further funding rounds into the future. So it'll eventually happen, but sometimes councils don't always get what they want.
Let's get into this list of questions from the About Regional community before it rains again. The weather has been such a yo-yo this afternoon here at the Bega River Reserve. The rural land strategy in the Eurobadalla, it's been going almost 9 years now, a real talking point in the community. Planning Minister Anthony Roberts was in town a week or so ago. Where are things with that? Give us an update on the minister's work.
Well, I'm really angry to see the Labor Party say that they're going to rip up what is 9 years of extensive work by good community members, good rural landholders, people who are working around the clock to make sure that we have a certain future and much way surety around rural lands in the Shire. And my challenge to its critics is point to one example where the council, through its rural lands review, is actually rolling back environmental requirements. Nowhere. The plan itself, from what I can see and the advice that I've been given, would allow about 250 dwellings in total. That's 5 streets, equivalent to 5 suburban streets into the rural area. And they've all got to go through a separate DA process. And the other thing that I'd say to the critics of the Rural Lands Review is, and particularly my Labor opponent, there is already state and federal legislation that needs to be adhered to when someone comes in to a council to lodge a DA. That still remains the case. So it wouldn't matter if it's around native vegetation, it wouldn't matter if it's around threatened species. All of that environmental assessment still got to go through the appropriate DA process. What the planning framework does is give the strategic direction, and we have fantastic primary producers, farmers out there in our Shire, who are producing wonderful produce for our markets, which people go along to and enjoy the benefits of that produce. And at the same time, we're giving certainty around what the rural sector can do from a planning perspective. So enough's enough. It's gone on for 9 years. And the planning minister has said, well, I'm going to sign this off. But to create this impression that 6 government departments are against the Rural Lands LEP, I mean, that's just wrong. And I've sat through individual meetings with someone like Rob Rogers, Deputy Commissioner of the RFS, to talk about their concerns in relation to the Rural Lands Review. Their concerns relate to how fire trucks can gain access to dwellings. Now, that's something which can be assessed through a DA process. But there is no evidence of those government agencies coming out saying don't approve the Rural Lands strategy. It's up to the planning department with the minister to make sure it's signed off, and the council provided at the end of last year, and it's going through that process.
Do you accept, though, that I guess in the minds of the general community, when 5 or 6 government departments lodge submissions, raise concerns, that rattles the community, that the government doesn't listen to that in a way?
Well, again, the key point is that we need to know their concerns so that they can be addressed by the planning department. And that's why they're sitting down, like I did with the Rural Fire Service, the council and the planning minister's department, the planning minister's department and the planning minister's office. And we actually talked through their concerns. It turns out it was a small number of dwellings where they were concerned if there was any further development in those particular parts of the Shire that it'd pose a problem for the RFS. Mm-hmm. We've got to live with the reality that when someone lodges a DA into the future, they're still going to have to go through all those requirements. So, I think, to be honest, what I'm seeing is, and I had someone who was extraordinary, someone from who'd moved into the area in the last couple of years, who wants to tell someone, like a producer down near Tilba, that, well, this is what you can and can't do on your place. I find that a little bit rich, particularly if you look at the way that Long Beach subdivision was done in terms of, there's not too many trees that were left there when those homes went in. So, everyone needs to be mindful of that. We all want to live here, but we've also got to be respectful of each other. And we do have an extensive amount of national park and state forests which need management, but we've also got environmental requirements on private landholders through the relevant legislation as well. And I think to try and use the Rural Lands Review as another means to try and put even more environmental protections in, I think is not fair, particularly on people who just want to be able to have certainty around their farms.
Has the submissions lodged by the Office of Environment and Heritage, the RFS, local land services, government agencies like that, influenced, changed what the Minister will do with the rural land strategy?
Well, again, we've said as a government it's incumbent upon the council, and so it should be. I mean, they're the closest level of government to the people, and they have now gone through extensive years of consultation. Those government agencies were involved right through the years of consultation with rural landholders. And the point is that in some cases those concerns need to be addressed, and have been. The RFS, what I've seen in terms of the Rural Fire Service, has been a very responsive process from Lindsay Usher and the Planning Department of the Council with Rural Fire Service, and that's how it should work. But to use it as a political weapon in a campaign like the Labor candidate is to garner Green support, I think it's just a bit rich. There's a very extensive process that's gone on, and I'd remind everybody, back 8-9 years ago, there was very, very large protest meetings and a certain petition that had quite literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of signatures on it, with rural landholders saying, give us certainty.
Here in the southern end of your electorate, the Connected Learning Centre at TAFE opened just last month, I think. It's flooded this week on the back of the big dump of rain we had. A question from the About Regional community: what's happened? What's the result of the flooding at the Connected Learning Centre?
I'm not sure what's caused that flooding, but I'm not going to go and attack the regional builder who built the facility. But these things can happen. I got a brand new train delivered to me in Sydney the other day, and someone hadn't put a latch down on it and water came through it. I mean, that happens. But what a wonderful facility. I mean, this was opposed by Labor, still is opposed by Labor, opposed by the Greens, opposed by a whole raft of people who said it won't work. Day one, it had 80 enrolments from young people who are going to be able to experience, around 26 new course offerings that were never ever offered in our region before. I went to a community forum the other day, and the Greens candidate said, "Oh yeah, you can't learn any of this. You can't learn to change diapers in a Connected Learning Centre." Well, go in and have a look, old trout. Go in and actually have a look and see what is going on there, because it is absolutely phenomenal, and you cannot deny the wonderful vocational experience that students are going to get, and the greater opportunities in terms of course offerings. The other thing we're going to do there is we're going to build a brand new trade centre and bring all the courses that are currently sitting in the old campus across to a new facility, so that everyone gets the benefit of a brand new TAFE in the heart of town, and a connected education precinct, which basically takes in the hospital old site, the new TAFE, of course the high school, and then of course the University of Wollongong.
I appreciate your time this afternoon. A couple of other quick questions. A question, I guess, that's related to the new Bateman's Bay Bridge. Someone wanting to know about floating pontoons at the waterfront at Bateman's Bay.
I suspect that's Harry Watson-Smith. And look, we've said very clearly we are going to activate the precinct around the bridge. We are going to obviously invest to, ensure it's a wonderful amenity, both, in terms of that. In terms of the floating pontoons, they're actually outside the remit in terms of what John Holland is doing there. So we're happy to look at that, work with the advisory committee and go and have a look at it. The element out of it is that it's certainly, in terms of the opportunities, will bring enormous benefits to those businesses that are along the foreshore. But for us, people told me we'd never get on with it. Well, here it is, and I announced that in 2015. Obviously, said we'd get on and build it. It's $274 million, the bridge. But we're also happy to look at floating pontoons and how you might gain access there. As a government, we're very pleased to be delivering cruise ships to Bateman's Bay. People should remember that it's the New South Wales Liberals government that, through the Ports Authority, is encouraging cruise ships into Bateman's Bay in the same way we do at Eden. And the beauty with Bateman's Bay is there's not another port in the state where you can actually drop people into the heart of a town, which is the benefit of Bateman's Bay.
Our last question, public dental health services at the South East Regional Hospital in Bega. When will they be open? When will that be operational?
I've got to get back to you in terms of the exact date on that, but that's being worked through with the Southern Area Health Service in terms of fit-outs and what have you. Public dental is very important. We've seen that through the Campbell Community Health over many, many years now. But, you know, ultimately, I believe it's not too far off, but I'll give you a greater indication shortly.
Election night, how do you spend it? Do you have a routine? You've been here, you've done that. How will you spend Saturday night?
Working.
Yeah.
So they've got me on Channel 7 on an election panel as obviously one of the senior leaders in the government. But I'll be working in the Bega electorate on polling day. And I'll be providing some interesting commentary. I think I'm sharing the panel with Barnaby Joyce, so that'll get quite interesting, I can assure you. But, you know, look, the thing is that, you know, what as I said at the beginning of the interview, we're going to have 45% of people actually, you know, voting before election day. So what we'll see on the night is, I believe, you know, a lot of the smaller birds will come in early because a lot of people have voted in the major towns already. All the pre-poll votes are being centrally counted in Bega, so they're being brought from Batemans Bay, Marimula in, and if you've got 45% of the votes sitting in one polling count place, it'll take a little bit of time, I'd imagine, to count. So that might just skew the time that you do know a result in terms of it. We'll get a little bit of an idea in terms of trends, but you know, look, it's a tight election. You know, it's the published polls are saying it's tight. You know, I've got a little bit of an inkling as to what some of the internal tracking polling is saying. But yeah, look, I think it's going to be an interesting night.
Thanks for your time. It's valuable. Appreciate it. Good luck. Election day, the 23rd of March, we've been chatting to Liberal, the sitting member for Bega, Andrew Constance. I hope this has been valuable to you as well. Aside from this interview with Andrew, you'll also find interviews with the Greens candidate Will Douglas and the Labor candidate Leanne Atkinson on the About Regional Facebook page. Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.
Good on you.
Thanks for tuning in to About Regional. My name's Ian Campbell. We'll talk again soon. Ta-da.